Hello. Kia ora. Welcome to the international edition. It's going to be very exciting. Thank you to beautiful flatmate Sammy for musical stylings. Yeah, wonderful. Another episode of Noise on the Bench. And what are we going to be doing next Saturday? Anyone got any ideas?
I might be going to Cinnamon Scroll.
Yeah, Cinnamon
What's
Scroll.
Cinnamon Scroll?
Well, Joe, Cinnamon Scroll is an outstanding tournament that is being run by the University of Auckland over Easter. And we know there are many Australians who are probably watching and many New Zealanders who are sad that their debating plans have been cancelled for Easter. And we've already had heaps of signups, so tomorrow's the last day.
If I was interested in Cinnamon Scroll, how could I convey that interest and ensure I'm signed up to compete in the Great Debating Tournament?
There is, in fact, a registration form, which I'm sure will be dropped any moment but now by the wonderful people at University of Auckland Debating Society onto this live stream. So we're making it exceptionally easy for you.
We'll go and find the Facebook
What
page.
about if I'm not a member of Auckland Debating Society or I don't debate in New Zealand? Am I still able to get involved in Cinnamon Scroll?
You do not have to be a member of the University of Auckland Debating Society. In fact, you do not even have to be a resident of New Zealand. Because it's a beautiful online tournament, there are also no international flying necessary, even though flights are very cheap at the moment.
That's
All
fantastic.
you need is an internet connection.
Yeah, all you need is an internet
Great
connection.
news.
And a live stream, like the ability to record videos.
That's true.
Neat. So, quick introduction. Doing it the international edition today, so we've got two beautiful guests coming on. Brynde Kreft from South Africa, wonderful debater, and then Zhang, Australian debater, winner of Australs. So we're going to have a lot of fun with these two beautiful guests, and they will hop on just in the same way we did with the guests last week, hopping on when we're ready for them in the stream. Equally, once again, we will be taking your calls. So if you want to give in a call to University of Auckland Debating Society, just flick a message in to our to the general Facebook page that this is being recorded on, and our beautiful people in the exec will get in touch with you, and you'll be able to call in live. We've also, of course, leave a comment, they'll be sent to us, or leave an anonymous comment, and we'll be able to discuss those throughout the show. So first things first, how are we feeling? How's quarantine? How's lockdown? General check-in.
I got, you said it the day before,
Almost yesterday.
6 bottles of wine, 3 bottles of good beer, and Daniel's girlfriend got a bottle of mead as well. So I'm feeling significantly better about lockdown than even a few days ago.
Mead.
We're currently 1.5 bottles of Chardonnay down.
Yeah,
so we're
we
making
should be
good
good
progress.
for like 4 to 5 days.
We're making good progress.
Neat. I'm also doing very well. Not consuming the mead or the wine, but my flatmates are in much better spirits, so that is always a wonderful thing.
We've got much stronger spirits.
But
How you guys feeling about Cinnamon Scroll? I was sitting at the flat today and it was a big, long adjudication call conversation about the motions and plans for the
We're
tournament.
working hard behind the scenes.
I think it's gonna be very good.
I think it's going to be a fantastic tournament.
I mean, everything's behind the scenes because it's online, but we're working hard.
Yes. Okay. Beautiful. So before we dive into this discussion of all of the wonderful things about international debating and chat to our guests, once again, a few things of news to come at you with. Obviously, we've already discussed Cinnamon Scroll. Registration closes tomorrow. It's already going to be quite larger than 10 rooms. So people are streaming in already.
And it's already very international.
Already very international. I've heard a rumor that we actually have an Australs finalist competing. Several Australs finalists.
And if you're a judge and you don't have plans for next weekend, it's going to be really easy to get involved in judging the debates.
Exceptionally easy because you can just register as a judge.
Easy.
Yeah, very easy.
So easy to know.
We have the development live streams that happen every Thursday. So next week we're going to be covering how to weigh points within a debate, something that many of our Australian viewers will be very familiar with, and are in fact, I think, very, very good at it. We have our Thursday club nights. Our first one was last week, went exceptionally well. Had a lot of people from outside of Auckland streaming in as well. Always welcome international and national guests. We've got our Women's Development Day tomorrow, so just head to our Facebook page and you can read all about that. And our Auckland Novice Tournament has been rescheduled for the 26th of April. It's also going to be an online tournament. Online tournament. One thing I will add, though, is that we have launched a program to basically deliver schools debating during the lockdown to kids in New Zealand. So there's a national online schools debating, and they need a lot of judges. So if you are interested in that, message Ailey or Sam Penno or Zach Wong, or go to the New Zealand University debating page, and we'll be able to hook you up with doing a really good thing for some kids who are obviously also stressed out, anxious, nervous.
And need something else to do.
Yes,
You don't want to just be stuck home all the time.
and you need something to do. So I think that'll be very, very good. Okay, so we can dive into a little bit of the discussion straight up. Tell me what you like about international debating. What value do you think it brings?
When you debate on a small circuit like New Zealand, you're in a wee pond. So there's cool ideas, there's amazing people. It's just a small number of us generating those awesome ideas and those cool conversations. And when you're international, it's a bigger pond. There's new and different ideas. I think that's really cool. So you have debates that you wouldn't have in New Zealand because they're new perspectives and you get to meet more people. And it just makes that whole conversation bigger and way cooler.
One of the things that I actually got told when I first went on exchange, I went on exchange a couple of years ago. I'm glad I'm able to bring this
Apparently Daniel went to Paris.
Yeah, I went to Paris on exchange.
I've never heard of it.
So we got told that it's very important to know your own culture. And I think when you're in a particular debating circuit, everything that is just like normal to do, it becomes the background, it becomes a default, you don't really think about it that much. So I think one of the coolest things about international debating is it gets you to think what makes your circuit particularly different. So I'll just throw out that question. What do you think sets New Zealand debating apart? What things do you think are prioritized in our style?
Really high quality accountable judging.
Yes.
That doesn't make us different, but we're really big on the accreditation system, which I think is a world.
Probably the world only.
Just like women's suffrage, we are leading the game. The other thing is a really big focus on analysis, and I think rhetoric was often deprioritized. I think it's more prioritized now. But.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's a product of having a reduced emphasis on BP debating. Just because of the way BP requires you to... I think we talked about this last time or another time. It requires you to emotionally distinguish yourself from other teams, whereas because we have less of a culture of that, I think we lean into being more, I don't want to use the term more analytical, but I think we have more of a focus on that, and we are less emotionally compelling.
Well, I think on the international. I think one of the gifts of doing Australs debating is there's nowhere really to hide in Austral style. In BP, you can be very flashy, but you just get annihilated if you're unable to make fully coherent, thought-out arguments. And so doing that for the half of the year, I think, does explain to some degree the fact that New Zealand and Australian teams are even successful when we go to BP tournaments, even though we don't do it necessarily as much as lots of other styles.
I think maybe some of our cultural differences are being eroded by the death of Old Joint over time. I think Old Joint taught particular systems of thinking, which I think sadly are slowly being left. But.
So just 2 bits of context for people who are tuning in from overseas. The first is, Grace mentioned the accreditation program. So New Zealand has a very formalized system of allowing you to become a judge at tournaments. So you don't just apply to a tournament straight out of high school, straight into university, and then basically do a judge's test and get ranked in that particular tournament, whether you can be a chair, whether you can be a wing, or whether you can be a trainee. We essentially do a program where you have to trainee your first tournament, your first couple of tournaments, until essentially you reach the standard that New Zealand thinks that you're capable of being a full judge. And this is quite a rigorous process. You have to give adjudications after every single debate. And then there's lots of discussions among the broader New Zealand community as to whether or not you're able to become a judge. So there's not that fluidity. You can't just jump in and out.
No, we really treat it like you're attaining a qualification. And we take it quite seriously.
Yeah.
And we're not shy of making people do it.
No,
not at all.
Often at national tournaments, it'll be 1 person a credit. So if you could imagine a tournament in your home circuit where only 1 person moves up a rank from trainee to winging,
I think it really does help to, doesn't go all the way at all, but it does help to eliminate some of the skills privilege that turns up. Whereas I suspect in other circuits, if you had been a really flashy school speaker, you'd turn up, people assume you're good, you'd be judging immediately. Whereas we really put the handbrake on and say, hey, you've got to actually prove yourself.
Yeah, one thing I would add is I think potentially there's a problem in New Zealand of judges plateauing after they do a credit though. So I think for New Zealanders watching, I think an important discussion to have with your execs and to have with general people who you know who are good at debating and good at judging is how do we create institutions and programs that allow you to continue to advance and get better as a judge, even once you've accredited or once you've met the standard where people think you can be a part. Yeah, because I think there's definitely a problem of plateauing. Do you have a moment in your debating careers that really highlighted the difference between New Zealand and some of the other circuits?
I mean, I've only been to Worlds once. I think both of you must have gone to Worlds more than once. Have you only been once? And I found that just really culturally jarring, going up against different teams from different countries who just had wildly different perspectives. Jamie and I when we were at Worlds in Greece, we had a debate about, it was an IR debate, and I can't remember exactly what it was about, but Russia turned up in the debate as an actor. Jamie and I think naturally for us took a pretty neocon perspective. Russia's a bad actor; it acts maliciously. Increased influence for Russia in the world is an objectively bad thing. We had missed the fact that the opposition closing team was Russian, and they just had, naturally had a wildly different perspective. Stuff like that.
I had a moment at Worlds just recently where it was a debate about education, and some of the discussion was about how that would affect, like school segregation and like school quality. And I realized that was actually a really difficult debate because education and how it's structured, how it's funded, like the degree to which there's like often like say segregation persists in countries is really different from country to country, and it's actually a huge amount of work you have to do analytically to explain to a judge how the intricacies of your like educational system or your tax system. Whereas if you're debating with people from the same country or even the same region, like Australians broadly vibe how our government works and vice versa, because they're quite similar. So much more work you have to do.
There are old war stories at Otago, and it'll be true at other New Zealand campuses as well, of turning up to Worlds and having debates on electoral systems and just being able to nuke the debate by running MMP. Because you run it and it just sounds so eminently reasonable to people from other countries in terms of having, elected representatives and constituencies, but ensuring it's proportional in that sense. And I can't remember if it was John or Alec or Liv who ran it back in the day, but apparently it just demolishes other systems, which is funny because we take MMP for granted.
Yeah, I love MMP. I think the big thing for me was judging. Judging really highlights the different things that basically national circuits prioritize, think are persuasive, think are important. And for me, it really precipitated a shift of going from, judges from other countries are bad at judging, to being like, judges in other countries judge differently. And that maybe is something that I can think about to improve my own debating.
Can I just say, I could be wrong here, but I think our circus, even though it gets political, it's far less political than a lot of other circuits overseas. And I think we're very lucky to have that culture.
Yes. One last thing before we bring up Brynde, I want to ask you is, do you think there's anything from overseas that you really like and think New Zealand should adopt?
Yes.
Yes.
We aren't as competitive as we were 5 or 10 years ago. I don't mean that in the sense of being less effective debaters, but I think we have a less of a culture of competitiveness, which means that, I don't think we perform as well on the international stage as we could, because I think people are a little bit less cutthroat than they could be.
Yeah.
That's not to say people should be more toxic to their friends and colleagues in the debating community, but I think we should have been running institutions like this and other institutions that Auckland Deep Soccer started to run in the last few weeks over the last 5 years, and I think it's a damn shame that we haven't.
Yeah. And it's also about the seriousness with which you approach things sometimes.
Yes.
There has been like a shift in the way we think, particularly about national tournaments.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I know. I'm a little bit nerd. I've always taken my debating super seriously.
I think we three are a bit.
Can I just say, no one asked me this question, but I'm ready to answer it. Thailand Worlds was amazing. So well organised. Yeah. Fantastic. So awesome. No one asked me, but that's my review.
Yeah, I think Dry Worlds was outstanding. And that's just me being a neo-prohibitionist.
I would go back to Bali Australs in a heartbeat.
Bali Australs was also great. More tournaments in Asia. We like tournaments in Asia.
100% more tournaments in Asia.
Okay, so we're about to be joined by our first guest. Our first guest is Brynde Kreft. She is phenomenal. World's quarterfinalist, world's breaking judge, DCA of Pan-African University Debating Championship. So very well qualified, very set in the African debating community, and has obviously performed very well on the international stage. So we're just waiting for her to flick a call into our Zoom.
I believe she may have judged my World's Octo Final.
She did judge your World's Octo Final.
There we go.
Nice. Did you win?
No, Daniel, I didn't.
Do you think you won?
No, not really. But you know what? I had a lot of fun. It was very cool. Lots of people in the room. It was a fun vibe.
Oh.
Here is Brynde.
Hello.
We love your background.
Hey.
What's up?
I'm very proud of myself for waking up because my phone battery died during the night and I still managed to wake up. I woke up actually panicked, like, oh my gosh, I've let Daniel down, but it was in time. So
I saw that she had not seen my messages on WhatsApp about half an hour before the show had begun, and I was freaking out and ready to pull out the contingency.
What's the time there?
so it's actually 8:15 now. It's not that early, but I mean,
I was worried Daniel had drafted you on at like 5 or 6 in the morning.
No. So we have a couple.
We have debated that early before, though. Daniel and I.
Yeah. So we've done some cross Indian Ocean debating that has required very early wake ups for whoever it is who's the unlucky one at that particular time. Okay, excellent. Tell us about South African debating, South African nationals and stuff, and how do you think it's different from the average style or way of debating at Worlds?
So I think South Africa, it's quite a big country. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm making big claims. Obviously, the US is like a massive country, but definitely I felt this quite acutely when debating in the UK. Is that like everywhere is a train trip away, and that's just not the case in South Africa. And I think what that means is that it's very hard to characterize a style that is true for the whole of South Africa. Often I think there's very clear styles that emerge for specific institutions. And then South African nationals is kind of an amalgamation of those, but they tend to be more distinct by institution than I think I've noticed in other places. That being said, things that I notice in South Africa, I think a lot of stuff shifts over time. Like I was thinking about this as I was watching the start of your call before I joined, or the start of the video before I joined, was like things that I would say characterize the South African circuit. They shift depending on what's popular, what's just been successful at Worlds in the past few years, things like that. But content-wise, I think the South African circuit is very strong on social justice, very strong on issues. I think that are relating to things like race and gender, but also kind of activism issues. And I also think like South African debating, the one stylistic thing that I think has consistently been the case is that the importance of strong conclusions is something that I think you see quite consistently being emphasized by judges and in the strongest speakers as being a key component of their style. The conclusions they aim to reach tend to be quite strong and tend to be an important part of getting the argument credited.
Oh, that's because I'd say there probably isn't a focus at all in New Zealand debating on having a conclusion. I never have a conclusion when I debate. It's just like, here is the end of my third point, and then I sit down. Did you change the way you debated when you were in your run up to Worlds?
So to an extent, yes. But I don't think it was about de-emphasizing South African components. So there was this one really good debater from UCT who did well at Worlds a couple of years before me. And I think really what characterized his style of debating was taking little components of everyone else's debating and adding those to his style. And I think that is kind of what I was aiming to do for Worlds, was adding in the things that like UK debaters do well to the background of what South African debaters do well. Yeah, I think it was primarily adding things rather than like de-emphasizing the South African way of debating, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. What was your training regime heading up to Worlds? Obviously, you had a very successful run. I remember texting you the results of the break at Cape Town Worlds.
So training was a very long-term thing for us. And I think here, again, it's worth emphasizing that South Africa doesn't really have as many tournaments as some other circuits do. I think the average South African team will do maybe 3 or 4, like 5 if they're lucky, tournaments in a year, which I think is fewer than other places, at least definitely fewer than in the UK. And definitely, like, it's very hard to get international exposure because it's quite expensive flying from South Africa. So I feel like my preparation for Worlds really started like a couple of years in advance. And then it was like a consistent building on that. But specifically in the year that Desmond and I did well, in January of that year, we'd already written up a training plan. And I think that training plan actually is quite important because it gives structure to the goal of wanting to do well at Worlds. And so we'd kind of noted down key tournaments we wanted to peak for and then consolidate afterwards. So yeah, part of the training plan was focusing around specific tournaments. The other thing that we did a lot of was, so Desmond and I did decide to work together, even though we hadn't been assigned to teams, and the way our trials works, we aren't guaranteed the partner that we want. But I think having core people that you work with and that you're committed to wanting to do well at Worlds and working with those people really, really helps for accountability and discipline to make sure that the training continues throughout the year. And a big emphasis for us in our training was international exposure. So it's talking to people that we know who are international, to people like Daniel. We also had some really helpful conversations with Dan Lahav and Duncan and John McKee. So having those conversations and watching videos, we watch all the HWS videos and like practice doing speeches during them. So that was a big part. The other thing that I think maybe is not done as much is we did a lot of drills. So drilling down on specific components of our speeches that we thought needed work on. And this was also a key part of the training plan, was we identified a lot of the areas that we wanted to work on, and then we would design drills that worked on those specific areas. So like structure or individual arguments or analysis, we have specific drills that worked on those things that we would do over and over.
That's amazing. Because I think the approach in New Zealand for training is very much like, let's do 100 practice debates. And I personally really like the idea of trying to focus on particular things you want to achieve rather than just throwing yourself in again and again.
Yeah, I think drills are definitely like way underused in New Zealand. We do a lot of just let's debate over and over and just try to keep smashing the like round peg in the square hole, you know?
Yeah, that's excellent. One of the things that Grace mentioned earlier, and this is something that New Zealand debaters will know all the time, we often get hammered quite a lot for using New Zealand examples just because people don't understand them. Did you massively change up the content you listen to, or how did you attempt to make that content jump?
Yeah, so examples definitely were a big thing for us as well. Some of it, again, is just talking to international people. Like there was one training session where I think you even might have been there, Daniel, because it was in the build up to a Worlds where you were training in South Africa in preparation, where me and my teammates' minds were absolutely blown to discover that, and obviously we should have already known this, but that some top universities in other countries are private, because our reality is just that the best universities are all government funded. And yeah, so it was just like a whoa, like how does that even work? So thinking about examples is quite important. I think a lot of the way that I accumulate knowledge for Worlds is quite passive. So I just subscribe to a lot of international content things on Facebook and Twitter. So like when I had Facebook, but at the time, like my Facebook was literally just used to consume news, and I would just subscribe to news pages, and then deliberately make the algorithm send me more of those by liking just news articles so that I got more of them. And so from those headlines, I think you build a degree of consciousness about what people think about the world in general. Podcasts I've also used a lot passively. So I just, like when I'm driving or going to the shops or standing in any queues, I'd be listening to like the Council on Foreign Relations podcasts, like the President's Inbox, those ones, because they have a very American perspective. But I think that sometimes just like it's from tournaments and being punished for using certain examples or perspectives that I've really learned the most. I think for me, debating internationally, the issues that I became most aware that I needed to think very differently about, or at least explain a lot more, were things to do with race. And the reason for that is that I think I noticed a lot, especially at first, that most countries talk about race as though people of color are the minority. And that's not the case in South Africa. It's also not the case in a lot of other countries in the world. And I think it's something really interesting to think about in the way that people talk about race in motions that are more international. So at things like Worlds, it's not the case I don't even think that people of color are the minority in the world. And so to talk about them as minorities is quite simplistic when or it is that you're only thinking about very specific countries that you're from. And I found like making that jump of thinking about minorities or race relations where people of color are the minority, something that I needed to adjust to. But I also think that there's an interesting perspective that people aren't thinking about enough. We also had to really learn a lot about Israel. And I think that's because the politics in South Africa, our government is very vocally supportive of Palestine. And I think that the issue was around like sensitivity of the language that we had been taught to use when talking about Israel was not at the same level of sensitivity that countries in Europe was. And learning about that basically came from really bad experiences and making mistakes when debating against teams that just didn't accept what we're saying, or that we had to think very carefully about whether what we're saying was as sensitive as it should be.
Yeah, different countries definitely have their own sensitivity points. And it's like navigating those particular divides are often one of the more difficult parts of international debating. So I'm going to get Joe to have a think about whether any of the questions sent to us, whether we should run them past you. But the last thing I wanted to ask about is you've also had some judging experience internationally, and also in a consensus-based style like Worlds, because obviously we're gearing up for Australs. It's not a consensus-based style. So the cultural differences definitely exist, but they're kind of mediated by just, come to your decision, that's the end. How did you find judging at Worlds? Do you find there were particular cultural challenges with that?
So when I judge, especially at international tournaments, my goal is to try to find out the source of the disagreement. And the reason for that is that I think if you can understand the source of the disagreement, it actually often is really reasonable. And I think that's like a key thing for people to know about international debating. It's like, in general, people aren't out to get you. The other teams and the other judges aren't bad. It's just different. And so if you can understand that source of difference, in general, it's much easier to resolve. And often the differences come down to things that teams just haven't done, and then it's a reasonable disagreement. But if you can isolate that it is a reasonable disagreement, people walk away feeling better about it, and it's easier to articulate the reasons to the teams. What I found hardest was when that wasn't possible, either because of the time pressures that Worlds has, or because there was too strong a consensus. So like if a couple of judges were from the same circuit, and that something would seem really obvious to them, and then it would feel really hard to break into that consensus and say, well, I see that kind of differently. And it's why I think that panels that are more diverse, even though they might have super different calls, I found kind of easier, because the roots of the disagreement were easier to isolate and then discuss those. And that really brings clarity to adjudication, in my opinion.
Great. We've just said, we'll go with this question. What's the best thing that's come out of your personal international experience in debating?
The best thing? I think I became a much better debater by competing internationally, but I also think the best thing for me was the personal discipline of trying really hard to be good at something. Because I didn't start out that successful internationally. I didn't break at my first Worlds or my second Worlds, and it took time, and it also took the decision that I wanted to be good, and then also the introspection about what I could do to make myself better and learn from the people around me who I thought had really valuable things to say. And yeah, I think something that I'm really proud of with that is that through my hard work, I was able to take a lot of components of my local circuit and reflect those on the international stage. Like I wanted to represent all the really brilliant people that I've learned from, who, for different reasons, haven't put as much time into trying to succeed at Worlds as I did. But I think that I hope that representing the traits that they really, I think, have that are excellent was something that I thought was really worthwhile.
Just one other question we've got in here. What were some specific things that you worked on in your trading plan for Worlds?
How specific?
I suspect where this question's come from, and I'll be interested in nitty-gritty details.
Okay, so I think, well, so in terms of drills, we did lots of drills where we would try to make our arguments more efficient. So we would first give an argument in 3 minutes, then do it in 2 minutes, then do it in 1 minute, and then discuss whether or not we'd cut the right bit. And in between each one, what we would do is give feedback to one another about how we thought that argument had gone in the 3-minute form, and then the 2-minute form, and then the 1-minute form. Another thing that maybe people wouldn't think about is we spent a lot of time thinking about being psychologically ready. And so there were some very specific things we did to prepare psychologically. The first one that I think is important for people who are new to international debating was to think of a reason or a narrative why we deserved to make a world's final. And that's not deserve in like a, I don't know, the world owes it to me, but like believing that your debating is good enough that you could be in a world's final. And the reason that that was really important is definitely for me, there are micro moments in debates where if you aren't fighting as though you could win, you won't win. And you actually have to believe and want to make it at the highest levels in order to be willing to really commit in those debates. And I think a lot of times people aren't mentally ready for how stressful it is, how scary it is. And if they don't have that clear vision of what they're actually trying to achieve, it's really hard to stay focused. Yeah, Worlds is a really long tournament and lots of people like get tired, but also on the final day, a lot of people just get really, really nervous. And especially in round 9, most teams that I've faced in round 9 are freaking out. And it makes them really erratic. And being mentally prepared for how stressful that 9th round, and then, you know, if you're lucky, the break rounds are, I think really helps teams separate teams from one another.
I think Grace and I have actually talked about particularly how Worlds and Australs aren't really comparable in that regard. Like I found Worlds way more exhausting than Australs because it's 9 debates instead of 8 debates. And I also just find BP debates particularly exhausting as a style of debating. So it just wrecks you.
It does,
Yeah.
I also think it's exhausting to feel misunderstood, which everyone does at Worlds in at least one debate. Like you feel like these people aren't here for me, and like they're not, but they are there for good debating. And so if you're trying to have a good debate, they're trying to be a good judge. But you do have to be resilient to that feeling of being misunderstood. And we had this rule, like you have to accept that there's one call you're just not going to understand and it's going to go terribly for you. And that's just part of Worlds. So that when it happens, you don't freak out. You're not like, oh my gosh, I misunderstood and we're doing terribly. It's just, this is the rules of Worlds, is this will happen. And then if it doesn't happen, then you're pleasantly surprised. So.
Nice. Is there one style of international debating that you find particularly fun to listen to, or?
I don't really like styles. I like listening to the debaters that kind of transcend styles. And I remember debating in the UK and being really frustrated that they were so set in a style that I thought that like Zhang would have not done well in that style because they were so set on certain things that they wanted that I didn't think like some of the best debaters ever necessarily had emphasized those things in their style. So yeah, my favorite debaters are ones who are not hung up on a specific style, but are so excellent they're able to bring themselves to the debate. I find those people the most interesting to listen to.
Amazing, neat.
Cool.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was wonderful to see you. Yeah, I think that's it from us. Do you have any last words you want to give, impart to the youth of New Zealand debating?
I think the most important thing, if you want to improve your debating, is you always need to be taking every bad outcome as a learning opportunity. When I was first being exposed to international debating, I think I would have loved to know that like the teams weren't good or that they were out to be biased against me. But I think that having the mindset of believing that people generally do want to learn from you and that they generally want good debates, and that you can always learn something from a call and something from a debate, even if it's not the best call or not the most favorable call to you. helped me to be more calm, but it also helped me to get the most out of debating. And if you aren't learning and getting better, like why are we doing it? So if you're not taking out positive things, then I think it's a worse use of your time.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, enjoy your lockdown where you guys get to have alcohol, because we can't buy alcohol in our lockdown.
Brynde has several times complained about the fact that in South Africa you're not allowed to go running.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
you can't go running.
neat. Lovely to see you.
Amazing.
So
Yeah.
John, another anonymous question to chat about. I'm gonna go check on the thing that is operating
Oh,
on
fantastic.
the other side of the
Fantastic.
Amazing.
I'm in no way, well, only a little way qualified to speak about this. Why is the US? Actually, this is a way more fun question. Let's do this question. For someone who has never been to an international tournament before, can you give a reason why based on debating and a reason why based on fun? I think it's saying, why should you go to an international tournament for the debating reason? Why should you go for the fun reason?
It looks really good on a CV.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
International debating looks lit on the CV. I went to the Australasian Debating Championship in Korea.
See, that I hate CV stuff, but
Yeah,
anyway.
I mean, that's like one of the non-fun reasons. It's a lot of, I think the rest of the reasons are fun, though. All of
In
the other
terms of
reasons. you can
fun,
go.
like often subsidized travel to a cool country.
Exotic locations and exotic people.
Exotic locations, meet new people, go with your friends because you hopefully like some people you debate with. So you get subsidized travel with your friends to like an amazing location with new food, new
And it's
things to
actually
do.
it is actually really cool to be able to travel with your friends.
Yeah.
Like, a
So
big group
cool.
of friends.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
So, and some places don't get subsidies, but I think I would just hammer on that. Often it's quite hard to find reasons to get all of your random friends together, and not just your random friends, people who you could be friends with if you went through like a bonding experience,
Yeah.
and then having that neat collecting point where you all go together, you all laugh together, you all cry together. It's like a good exhausting experience.
totally.
Yeah, I think it bonds you beautifully.
Kind of outside of extracurricular activities, you just do not get life experiences like that. We're a mixture of friends and people with potential to be friends in this amazing competitive environment doing an activity you really love. Like,
Yeah.
sure, you can travel with your friends, but it's kind of being it's centered around something you all care about is really cool.
Also, this might be a bit, don't know how to phrase this, but when I travel with New Zealanders debating, it makes me feel like a New Zealander in the same way that just living like an ordinary life in New Zealand doesn't. So I think about like when we arrived, at Australs in the New Zealand party bus, and we were all singing Poie, and as we got out onto this like enormous lobby of this Balinese hotel, all the Australians and Asian debaters were just like, what on earth is going on?
So
It
what
was
you're
just like
saying is
19 of
it's
us.
nothing like going overseas.
National-
It feels like you're at home.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's a little bit what we were discussing with debating styles itself. Like, you don't really understand what makes New Zealand debating unique, what New Zealand debating particularly prioritizes, until you see how other countries don't prioritize them. And then that's a shocking experience. What do you mean they don't wait my beautiful way of speaking?
Also, getting to stay in nice hotels. It's so good.
Oh, it's pretty good.
I love hotels.
Pretty
In
good.
terms of debating, I think we've covered it. Like and like drawing on what Brynde said, like seeing new styles, seeing really new content that completely like shifts your little pea brains. Is it the Overton window?
Yeah.
It shifts your little pea brain Overton window. Like new content, new thinking. Like, and you can take that style of thinking to every consecutive tournament, domestically and internationally, but also through you in life. With you through life. That kind of new content, new way of thinking,
Yeah,
exposure to new ideas.
definitely.
Like, you learn so much at an international debating tournament.
And you make friends that you can then invite on your debating live stream years and years down the track.
I should do that. At some
So my I think it's actually my parents, I think, who pointed it out. Whenever I come back from a tournament and I'm like, oh, and I'm not friends with this person from Poland, and I'm friends with this person there, they tend to get a very wistful expression and just tell you like how lucky you are and how unusual it is to have an international just like network of people with whom you have a shared experience.
It's fantastic.
It's just
Oh,
it's
it's incredible.
gorgeous.
Also, this is super wanky, but like you're meeting like people who will go on to change the world. Like the top debaters from like
Saeed Sadiq is a cabinet minister. Saeed Sadiq's a cabinet minister in Malaysia. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm not saying, like everyone will, but you're meeting people there who, without realizing it, will be like,
Yeah.
Leading the EU in 20 years, or like
Yeah, like Michael didn't. What's his name? Michael Gove. CA'd several
They
worlds.
CA'd worlds. I think
Yeah,
I might
like-
CA'd once.
Just wild.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying that you should go, but just for that reason, I think it's interesting. It's really cool.
Yeah.
You'll meet your future
Oligarch.
overlords.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oligarchs
I think it's
from random countries.
Get to vet them.
Neat.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to chat about before we give Grace a
I'm
ring?
just going to see if there's another question. Oh, I do want to tease this out, but let's do it briefly because I find it wholly uninteresting. Why is the US debating circuit so radically different to the rest of the world? My personal addition to this question, I assume that's under, is have you seen the Netflix film Candy Jar and what are your thoughts?
So I know quite a bit about American debating because I have friends who do it. It is so you know how we do Australs and then BP. They do BP sometimes, and then the rest of the time is devoted to like a really weird style of debating called ABDA. It's like American Parliamentary Debate Association, and it prioritizes very different things to other styles of debating, which sometimes carry over into the way they do BP. But I think it's a very classic example of where the style leads to outcomes in the way people debate. Also, like maybe it's just a little bit of a problem of like American exceptionalism, American perspective. Like it's impossible for the rest of the world to ignore what's happening in the US. It is entirely possible for Americans to ignore what's happening in the rest of the world. And it can be very frustrating if like they stand up and give like 16 minutes of material about how this operates in 3 American cities. And then they misunderstand some big contextual issues that the rest of the world has to deal with.
Yes.
Anything to add, Joe?
Should we just have a very brief, very brief before we call Grace, discussion of our thoughts on career worlds? How likely do we think it's going to happen?
I think it's going to happen. I think places like the United States. Oh, we're being joined by Grace.
Oh, fantastic.
I think places like and in fact, I was talking to Grace about this today. And the world has the different perspectives on it. In that, I think that career worlds is going to happen. I think it's going to happen in person. And Grace was skeptical.
There's a knowing smile that says no.
Can you hear us?
Oh, hey, yeah, sorry, I was just watching it on my phone, and so I think that there was a delay. But now it's my turn, so I've turned that off. Hey guys.
Hello. Did you hear the brief discussion we just had?
No.
We were talking about career worlds, and I was explaining that you and I talked about this today. In that I think it will happen. I think that
Yeah, you have a very wrong opinion that it will happen. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that people are not doing very well. By people, I mean Western governments, and so Korea will just be like, no, don't come. And I think that they should say that. Anyway, that wasn't one of the questions you sent me.
I'd be okay with that. Neat. So the first thing I want to chat to you about, Australian debating gets criticized in New Zealand, but I've noticed that different campuses actually debate quite differently. Would you describe like Melbourne, for example, style of debating as being quite different to Sydney? What do you think are common in Australian debating?
Yeah, I think it is quite different because just geographically, like it's very difficult for us to get together. Similar to what Brynde was saying, is like you just have to fly and pay like $300 round trip to go to an interstate mini. So I think the Sydney teams, like geographic Sydney teams, not just USU, they sort of develop a kind of style, and then in Melbourne we have a different kind of style that's more similar to like Monash, for example. So I think like Sydney, in particular USU, are like excellent orators. Like I just think that they're quite lyrical, that their execution is always flawless. Whereas I think for us in Melbourne, we're a lot more sort of backstage, at the bench, always thinking, how do we close off every possible sort of path to victory for the opponent? So I think it's a lot more of the behind the scenes stuff, the stuff that gets decided before you start speaking. And the sort of stuff that I really admire about, for example, Sydney debaters is a lot more of the execution and on the spot kind of stuff. But having said that, like I just don't think that debating is necessarily that different. I mean, we can sit here and pick out all the nuances all day, but they're obviously quite granular when we do go down to the differences. Like we're talking 95% of the stuff is just common. It's just a common kind of language. It's a common mannerisms, that kind of stuff. We're all the same person, like, you know, we're all the same breed of like ENTP or whatever. So it's kind of like where there are differences, yeah, sure, they make a bit of a difference, but I don't think we're like, you know, that different. Yeah.
So, for example, if you went to a tournament like Australian Easters, would you have, here's what I need to do to win Sydney judges' perspective, or do you just debate the same as you would in a Melbourne internal?
Well, me personally, I'm just like not paying that much attention most of the time, so I just do whatever. But no, in all seriousness, like, yeah, we do. We go like, okay, you know, Sydney, they're sort of used to their internals, and you know, they're used to the minis that we don't get to go to all the time, so we need to do extra to, you know, win them over. Extra framing, I think Sydney are excellent at framing, and whereas we're sort of more like layers of rebuttal, weighing things, that kind of stuff. So it is like slight, but at the same time, like I'm not sitting there, you know, in the middle of my speech being like, oh shit, I didn't do the Sydney judge grabby things. So, you know, it's there in the back of your mind, but it's not a huge deal.
Interesting. Yeah. So even if you don't do it consciously during speeches, for example, in the run up to the tournament, obviously you did very well at Australs. Claps. Did your team have a chat about how you'd win Australian and New Zealand judges, or shift your approach in order to make sure that you're not just debating like Australians?
Yeah, no, we definitely did. I think we just tried to do everything a bit more, so not rely on framing, not rely on flat rebuttals or anything like that. So we tried to really pay attention to, you know, rigorous weighing, rigorous sort of impacts and conclusions and stuff. But it wasn't as if we got the draw and we were like, we have a New Zealand judge and an Asian judge, let's switch our strategy to, like, you know, get them. It's just like in the lead up is a general philosophy. We're going to do you know, the things that you always should be doing, but perhaps you get a bit lazy with when you're just used to your own circuits judges.
Yeah, the way Brynde described it was bringing different strengths of different circuits into the way that you debate. And I definitely have a similar perspective in thinking, with Australians, I need to get as good as framing at Australians. And I need to be as good at making logical internal points as the European and Israeli debaters. But I think what you said actually gets something a little bit deeper, and that it's not just about our strengths, it's about not relying on the crutches that exist within our circuits, because we so often have stuff that we just do like fairly automatically, and we never like push ourselves to go past that point. And it's just like a crutch within debating that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, totally. I think people get complacent, and that's not it's an attack on their moral fiber. That's just, that makes sense.
Did you what was your broader approach to training for Australs? Did you change the content you read and listened to? Did you do exercises? Brynde was talking a lot about how using drills was particularly effective for her in her Worlds run.
Yeah, well, I guess we obviously focused a lot on, you know, Southeast Asian politics. I think it was quite good because my particular team was quite diverse in our interests. The only thing that united us all was that we're like economics students, so blah, right? But like, other than that, I'm an economics and gender studies student, so I was focused on gender, race, pop culture, that kind of stuff. And Connor is an international relations and politics student, and Stu was a law student. So I think by nature, we covered like a lot of different areas, so that worked to our advantage. I think for us, like, we didn't get to go to many lead up tournaments. We went to one interstate and one in Melbourne as a team. And so like all we could do with that is just make every debate count. So I think we really focused on, like, post debate, we would have a debrief and really went into detail, just trying to like squeeze everything we could out of every single debate. And so our focus wasn't necessarily on, like, you know, doing as many debates as possible. It was like, for each debate that we do, how can we take absolutely everything that we can out of this.
Yeah, so did you split up formally the different types of content you were going to be looking at, or did you just organically allow it to arise and make sure you're curating the right diet?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like formal. It wasn't like, oh, you read up on these things. But like, you know, my newsfeed is different from Connor's. Like, Connor's not reading as many like Vox articles about, you know, Tiger King and shit, right? So it's like, I think naturally there's that distinction, and it's just very easy to keep going along the lines we're already, you know, quite familiar with.
Neat. At Australs, I remember speaking to you. So in fact, 3 of us were involved in the Octo final you knocked me out in. Of course, myself, and then Joe was on the panel, and I still let him move in and join us as a flatmate. So I think that's very, very magnanimous from me. Your approach was very give no ground, make no concessions, a very like strong line the whole way. And I remember you saying, Daniel, you had this bit in your leader's reply where you tried to like square an edge, and you were like, aha, at that point I knew that we were up in the debate. Could you explain this approach?
Well, first of all, I don't know if that's a sort of like a give no ground kind of thing. I think we are like very responsive, and we do try to respond to everything, but that's not necessarily the same thing as not conceding anything ever, because I think like you make strategic concessions, but at the same time you don't want to bank on any one particular point. And that was part of what we considered in our philosophy and our approach, is like there are just arguments that people won't buy, that they won't find compelling, and you just can't rely on each of them. So I think that might have come through as us being like, you can't win a single point. But I think that wasn't the intention. The intention wasn't to like choke out a discussion and not give any ground. It was rather, you know, we're not going to put our eggs in like one basket. We're going to just really like cover a lot of ground. But yeah, I think that debate was quite particular as well, in that there were so many different paths to victory that, you know, like you guys pushed us into a kind of like, we need to grab or seal off each of those paths to victory, instead of sort of usually relying on weighing or a particularly compelling argument that we're winning. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think we're perhaps as like, you know, take no prisoners as you may think that we are.
You didn't take any prisoners. It was really sad.
I still love you though. I love you, and I hope you love me too.
So I'll let Joe have a think about whether there are any comments from the stream that'd be cool to run past you.
We've had one question that people are keen to ask. How does the approach to training for AWDC differ to the approach to training for Woodok?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I think it's.
How does Australia's approach to training for AWDC differ to the approach to training for Woodok?
I'm not sure that there is that much like of a conscious difference. I guess like at AWDC, one thing is that it's a regional tournament, you know, it's still Australasian women's, so there's much more of a focus on Asian politics and things like that, whereas, you know, for Worlds you have to read up wider. But I don't think like people go into it being like, women's, it's only, you know, female non-binary judges, like that's going to be different or anything like that. I think it's still just your basics. And if anything, the difference comes from at Worlds, when you just have to, I don't know, like prepare for so many more different scenarios and things like that. But like women's is just a fantastic tournament, and it's so rich that like I don't think you can really pinpoint huge differences. At the end of the day, it is like an international major, and I think that those training fundamentals will be true for no matter what major you go to.
Does the pro-am nature of the tournament change much? Is it it's a pro-am tournament, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that changes like sort of the focus, or the sort of philosophy that you go into it with. You know, it's about development, it's about like having fun. I just like remember the two women's that I've been to have just been like two of the best tournaments I've been to. But having said that, like when you're like training for it, you know, it's not like you're doing things entirely differently. It just means that you're perhaps going in with more of a development focus. You know, it's like the drills that you're doing are not different or anything like that. Yeah.
So in terms of also you've done judging at Worlds, and obviously you're on the CAs of AWDC this year. Did you find there was any big cultural challenges for when you judged at Worlds, or is there anything you're taking into account being on an Edge Core? Obviously Joe's also on an Australs Edge Core, so that's something he can talk to.
Yeah, I think the cultural differences are very important. I think the first thing that I'll say, which doesn't really answer your question, but is quite interesting, is as a judge, I almost find it easier because debaters are not relying on crutches or not taking points for granted that they would in their own circuits, or that we would see at like Australian Easters, for example. Like at Worlds, so much more is contentious, and so things that teams would ordinarily all agree on in a debate are not all agreed on. So as a judge, that is like actually a real pleasure to watch, and it's a real pleasure to be able to like be amongst that discussion. I think it makes the discussion a lot richer. So in some ways, I think that cultural difference makes judging easier. But of course, like on the other side of it is like, you know, you always have to be aware of your biases. I think like there's a kind of tendency to focus mostly on like white debaters, and be like, you know, focus on your biases and that kind of stuff. But like for me personally, there was a lot of like, you know, I am a person of color, but I've grown up in a Western country, and my brain has obviously rotten to the capitalist, like white patriarchy. You know, it's all been infiltrated, right? So it's like you do have to still be so conscious, and just be so critical all of the time. But at the same time, it's like, you know, it's not something that's so difficult to grasp that you can't, you know, still enjoy yourself judging, that you can't just like take the arguments for what they are. You just, you know, got to have that in the back of your mind.
Neat, amazing. Unless we've got any more questions, I think we will be done. Is there anything that you want to say to the youth of New Zealand debating?
The youth. Yeah. Like it's a lot of pressure, you guys. Like I'm not in a position to influence anyone. That's a terrible idea. I think like be really conscious about, or be really deliberate about what you want to get out of debating, and don't just get caught up in the fervor and the competitiveness of it all. I mean, if that's the decision that you want to make, then by all means make that decision, but don't let the culture of your contingent or sort of the pressure of international majors influence you to value certain parts of debating more than others. Like if you just enjoy going there and hanging out with your friends, then don't let anyone sort of push you to take things more seriously than you want to. And if you take things really seriously, like that go you know, don't let people sort of shame you for wanting to do really well. I think one thing that's really interesting, like sort of as I've gotten to the end of my debating time, and you know, a lot of my friends being really successful sort of international debaters, is like we all reach this point of like, why are we doing this? And I think we all get sidetracked and a bit lost somewhere along the way of like, you know, we lost sight of why we did this in the first place, or what is it that we wanted to get out of debating. I think that's completely different for each individual as well. Like every individual wants something slightly different out of debating, and yet you get caught up into this like fervor, this amalgamation of all our dreams and hopes and whatever. So keep focus and keep sight of what makes you love debating and what makes you want to keep coming to tournaments. And don't do drugs if you're not in your home country. that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, you get many very cute people through international debating. Isn't that right, Grace?
I agree, definitely.
Nate, thank you for joining us.
No worries. Thanks. It's been a pleasure, you guys. Have fun in your isolation.
Thank you. Do you have anything special to check in the oven?
I'm gonna go check the special thing. One thing that I think that would be cool to chat about as we end the immersive experience is what are some cool thoughts that have been provoked by these discussions, or things that'd be good for people to take away. Ugh.
I want to know what Daniel meant by saying to Grace, you get to meet cute people. I'm just tossing that out there. I just think there was another meaning there.
That was the biggest Grace.
Oh, okay.
What I would take away from what both people said is the importance of being deliberate. Like, I'm so bad for just being like, yes, I did 3 debates this day. I've learnt so much, without being like, okay, is doing a whole bunch of debates over and over actually the best way for me to get good? Like, is my deficiency actually in being unable to have the stamina for a 60-minute debate, or should I just actually be working on my introductions or my case building or my POIs? Like, I'm so bad, and this is true like also my study habits, but just being like, if I work really hard and do lots of debating, I'll just get better. But actually, like, both those speakers we just had pointed out, if you're thoughtful about what you need to get better on, you can work so much smarter.
How good was Brynde's idea about trying to make points more efficient? Just doing it in 3 minutes and then doing it 2 minutes and 1 minute. I thought it was such a good drill.
So
like, we should do that in New Zealand.
Yeah. One of our future episodes is going to be all about training, and I think we can invite Brynde back to give us a full run through.
I think it's great. I want Brynde to train me.
Very smart, very particular.
Yeah.
Joe, any big takeaways from you, or any other questions that are left unanswered from our beautiful commenters?
I have a comment.
Oh, sorry. No, I will jump in here. Sorry. Someone made a question, but I think I'd rather tease it out as a discussion area. It's around how New Zealand is in the lead up to Australs, like just 99.9% of the time, just debate other New Zealanders. So at Worlds, we try to go to Australia and go to other places and do practices. But for Australs, we're really insular. Do you think we should change that? I think we probably should.
Yeah, so obviously it's a bit easier for older debaters who just have like friends they can debate with. So for example, I've done lots of like random things with Australian debaters. And in fact, a trend that I've noticed is lots of Australians are seeking us out to debate as well, which has been very cool. So like Rob Barry often comes
Shout out to Rob Barry.
Shout out to Rob
What a
Barry.
good lad.
Awesome person. But we've also had some other like Australians signing up to signing up to Cinnamon Scroll. A lot of Australians have signed up to Cinnamon Scroll, but also just like our clubs night, having a couple Australians there has been amazing.
To state the obvious, the trickiness with that is that like it's so expensive, and New Zealand is a poorer country than Australia and per capita GDP, etc. It is quite hard to actually like travel. So if you're wanting to engage internationally, it has to be like Skype. So I think sometimes it's tricky, like if you don't know someone to be like, oh, let's Skype debate. I think it can be quite hard to kind of get your foot in the door with that experience. Like, I think it'd be really cool to look into, like, and I don't know how this would work, and I like dread the admin behind it, but like setting up some channel by which people who don't already have friends in Australia can find practice partners from overseas.
Probably your exec should be doing that. Like the institution
You'd
should
hope
be
so.
making an effort to connect with people
That's
overseas.
hard, but I mean, also your exec has to know who to contact, right?
Yeah, it's true. I have a hypothetical question. So suppose you were a 25-year-old PhD student
Yes.
who wanted to head back to Worlds. Do you think that's legit, or would that person be too old?
No,
No,
Like,
not too
of
old.
course not too old.
And leave your reckons in the comments below as well.
No,
Not too old?
Probably not too old.
So young.
Okay.
Well, remember, and this is one of the more interesting things that I've noticed about international debating, is the ages are way more varied than just Australia and New
Yeah.
Zealand. So for example, countries with compulsory military service, or ESL countries where the students who have like really upskilled their English language skills are in there doing their PhD, masters or
grad
PhDs
students,
or grad students, will often be much older. I know like 30-year-old
Yeah.
debaters from Israel who have done very well.
Also, there's like random old people floating around at Worlds as like chaperones and coaches and
Which is
all kinds
fine.
of stuff.
Like the elders of our society are welcome.
Rob
Yeah.
Barry has said that you're never too old. Shout out Rob Barry. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rob.
I have one general comment on international debating, which it's just like worth noting. I think that, like, on my experience as a target exec, it's hard to get like new and kind of novice speakers sometimes to go along to those tournaments because people feel like, wow, to go overseas and like spend my money doing that, I should be really good at it first. And that's, fair enough. But at the same time, it's like when I went to Australs in my first year, like I was a complete just menace, complete chaos.
Yeah.
But it was still just so much fun and I learned so much. Like those tournaments, particularly Australs, because it's so big. Like even if you are the weakest speaker in your society, you can go to Australs and generally have a huge amount of fun and learn quite a lot. It's a really cool experience, and don't feel like you have to wait till you're like feel 100% ready to go to those tournaments. Like if you want to go, there's like I think people feel like, oh, I have to put myself forward, I should be good.
Was
So
your
if you
first
wanna go-
Australs Perth?
Yes.
Yeah.
What was your first Australs Korea?
So Korea, yeah. So I like going to Korea Australs was like one of the best decisions of my
Shout out to Korea Australs.
Korea Australs.
Shout out
And
to Korea
so
Australs.
Joe and I are also going to have our final, well, no, not his final, my final like international debating tournament is going to be Korea Australs, and I think it's quite beautiful that Korea Worlds. So I think it's quite beautiful that I started with Korea Australs and I'll finish with Korea
I think
Worlds.
it's going to be a political cataclysm if I go to Worlds next year as well.
Just do it anyway.
No one's holding you accountable. It's too big to hold you accountable.
Yeah. Yeah. Also,
I'm gonna
one
cop some
thing.
flack, though.
One thing I would add for everyone listening is there are obviously like awful, very, very awful parts of the fact that there's a global pandemic. But you should try and take advantage of the fact that you have unprecedented opportunities to engage with international debating at almost zero cost. So come to something like Cinnamon Scroll, go to online Australs. Like there'll be lots of people from other countries. Like Cinnamon Scroll, for example, has signups from India, has signups from the UK, has signups from Australia, like really from all over the place. And it is an awesome opportunity to start engaging and building your knowledge of other styles of debating, starting to paper up those cracks.
Anders just said, we had a little bit of a chat about this earlier, and I wonder if it's been asked again. Tell us reckons about Wordix going ahead or Wordic going ahead.
I think it'll go ahead, but also it's good to live in optimism.
I found Grace's argument that a lot of white countries have fucked this really bad and Korea might not want them in pretty compelling.
My thing is that I think white countries are going to fuck it so bad they're going to have herd immunity pretty soon.
Jesus.
Yeah, and like hundreds of thousands of people.
Okay. I don't know that we necessarily know yet that you can get immunity,
Yeah, that's true.
and also how long that would take to accumulate that herd immunity. So, how quickly are those countries going to be
Overrun.
infected
Yeah.
and overrun? And I mean, I think governments are going to do their best not to allow that to happen. So, if it does happen, it's going to be a drawn-out process so that that's concluded. Very difficult question.
Yeah.
I think that, particularly I can't speak for you guys, but I kind of, because we, particularly the flat, we had a stockpile going since like February.
Pretty good.
Daniel and I were pretty confident the way things would go, so prepped early.
We saw a lockdown coming. So I kind of feel like, oh, we're in lockdown now. This is like, the pandemic is at its peak, but I think that from a global perspective, this thing is really actually still at the start.
I think
So
it's
there's
extraordinarily
too
hard
little
to predict.
Exactly. There's too little info right now. We don't really know what we're.
I really hope it goes ahead. And sometimes it's good to hope.
Unfortunately, Daniel's really optimistic.
Yeah. But then again, worst comes to worst, we do online worlds. Be very difficult, but okay, it's definitely doable. And that's life.
We're going to have to work out. We're going to have to do a big party. I don't know. I think it'd be hard to do internationally, but I think New Zealand debaters might need to do like a, if we're all just stuck in the same country, might need to do like a fun tournament.
Yeah.
So like we might need to ingratiate North Islanders to Claytons softly and nicely by making Summer Claytons happen. Summer Claytons has been tossed around as an idea for a wee while.
Amazing, yeah.
I think Summer Claytons are summer.
Yeah.
Sorry, I realise I've warped our international discussion to lobby hard for Summer Claytons,
Yeah.
but I'm just going to carry on with that. I think Summer Claytons are summer might need to be a thing.
So a discussion that we actually had before New Zealand went to lockdown obviously squashed that idea viciously. It's just like if Australs was online, just all of us go to Queenstown together and just have like a Queenstown
so
Australs.
fun.
And it'd be so cheap because all the international tourists still wouldn't be back. So have a think about like if it comes to Worlds where New Zealand is no longer in lockdown, but it's still difficult to host international debating tournaments, we should all just go to a place together, rent out a few like houses in like a long row, have like New Zealand party, and then stay there for 2 weeks.
Let's really burn our hotel's bandwidth.
Yeah, definitely.
Zoom debating.
Yeah, Queenstown's got good internet.
Yeah.
So I'm going to show you all what we were doing off screen. So I have made some cinnamon scrolls.
Oh
you
my
have to put
god,
the
because
icing
next
on them.
weekend is cinnamon scroll.
Because next weekend is cinnamon scroll. Look how much I've committed to the bit. I actually made cinnamon scrolls that my teammates are going to eat deliciously
Great
over the next
enthusiasm.
enormous enthusiasm. We still have to put in the cream cheese, various
I've
bits
lost so
Oh,
much weight, and it's
no.
all going to go back on.
Yeah,
I'm so
Daniel's
excited
going
to
to
eat
fat
them.
me up.
with some cinnamon scrolls. Okay, I think those are our last thoughts.
Last thought. Cinnamon scrolls next weekend. If you want to go as a judge or a speaking, sign up by tomorrow. Someone from Auckland Deb Sock will put the form online.
Yeah, it's
It's
probably
gonna-
in the comments already.
It's going to be heaps of fun. You're probably locked down anywhere if you're in New Zealand and Australia.
In most of the world at this
Uh,
stage.
the speaking is going to be really high quality. So it's great practice if you're a speaker. If you're a judge, it's really easy to judge from home. You can sit in your pajamas. Like, it'll be super comfy, real easy. It's some great debating. So sign up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't be ashamed to admit that you love debating and you'd like to spend your weekend doing it.
You are watching a debating themed live stream on your Saturday night, so we know that you are not. You don't have other things to do. Neat, wonderful. Thank you.
Adios.
Lovely to see you.